When, and we'll start with Senator Doug Okuniewicz. Do we have, there's a microphone in the center. If you could take about a minute, please. Thank you.
We on? How about now? All right. Doug Okuniewicz, Legislator District 3. I live in Hayden. I'm a senator, state senator. I'm the chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee. I also sit on Resources and Environment. In my view, great session. We made a lot of ground on the conservative front. We instituted a brand new budgeting process that people who are not fiscally responsible don't like. And it was a bloodbath, and it took a lot of fighting behind the scenes, but we got it done on both sides. It worked extraordinarily well, I believe. We had some other big ticket items that came through. For me, and being part of the Transportation Committee, one of the things we did, it ended up being our going home bill, was killing a sale of a piece of property that the state owned in Boise that was being sold, or was about to be sold, and we were able to get that stopped as part of passage of an appropriation bill. That, as I said earlier, I think I used the term bloodbath, that ended up being a bloodbath. It was a really tough fight, but it was clear that the right thing to do for constituents was to kill that deal. By the estimates coming out of JFAC, we saved the taxpayers roughly $70 million on that. So we were berated publicly and even in the body endlessly about doing what's right for business, letting industry know that they can do business with the state. And everyone here, I would expect, I know I did when I debated on the floor, I said, I don't care about anybody but the constituents, my constituents. We're fiduciaries for them. This deal saves them money. If they wanted to walk away from this today, they would, and there'd be no repercussions and nobody'd say boo about it. The fact that the deal isn't good for us and we only recognized it now, that's too bad. So we walked, we got the deal killed, but it was a huge fight. So anyway, I feel like it was a great session. Thanks for coming.
Vito, Barberi, District 3, my seatmates. I thought it was overall very good too. We got a couple of bills passed that helped kind of rein in rules, which, as you know, is my thing, trying to establish more legislative authority over rulemaking and the rules, the agencies, because the agencies are where the rubber meets the road. The agencies are what really manifests government in our lives. So we've had some great headway there. You can't go too far without mentioning that this transportation issue. Everybody insisted that it was a signed deal, and it wasn't signed. It wasn't finished. But the misinformation that gets out there just blows my mind, and that's just so important to remind you that you can't trust anything you read. You can't trust anything you hear. And at least question it. At least, try to dig deeper. Call us, see if we can get, not that we'll have all the information, but, don't trust anything you read and you hear, because the misinformation is out there for one purpose. Bigger state, bigger budget, less taxpayer input, less taxpayer concerns. Remember, we're here, and this is one of the most solid groups you've had from the North. We're here to represent the taxpayer and figure out a way, if we can stop shifting taxes and start lowering taxes at the expense of the state, what more could we ask for? Not that that's not a heck of a battle. Anyway, let your questions go. Thanks.
Jordan Redman, District 3, again, my seatmates here. Overall, this was only my second year down there, and so I have less experience than these two, but I felt really pleased with the session. I mean, there's always wins and losses and everything. I think a lot of the wins were large wins for, whether it be health freedom, religious freedom, working through the budget process. Those are all huge wins. There's obviously some hot topic issues, immigration. I sit on the Health and Welfare Committee, so Medicaid's always a hot topic for us. We had some legislation move forward with that. However, it got stalled out in committees, and so you definitely look at those as losses, but also learning experiences, and what do we learn for next year when we bring something similar back. And hopefully it sheds lights on the folks that voted kind of against those things, and they're pretty conservative principles Excuse me. So hopefully that brings about some change throughout the state. And again, really appreciate everyone up here. It is a really nice group to work with because I think we're all pretty aligned on our values. So thank you.
Joe Alfieri, District 4, with my compadres over here, my friends on this side. You know, I'm going to be a little more moderate on it. I'm a little disappointed in some of the things that happened in the legislature. We got many things through the House that did not make their way through the Senate. You cannot, though, underestimate the value of what happened with the budget. The budget reform process is enormous and bodes well for the future. On the negative side, we had a traditional family values resolution that Ben and I co-sponsored. Got that through the House, died in the Senate. Election integrity crimes bill that I wrote, we couldn't even get that through the House, even though we proved that we had some issues. Ballot harvesting, we killed ballot harvesting this year, which is, I think, very important. We also had a fentanyl bill passed, which the sheriff and police, local police have been asking for, so we got that done. And a very small tax cut, a small tax cut on your income taxes. But there is much work that remains to be done. If we can keep this group together, we can hopefully push more legislation that is the type of legislation that will defend our freedoms and stop the growth of this state.
Ben Toews, District 4 Senator. It's an honor to serve for you down in Boise. I have mixed feelings about this session as well. I tend to be more of an optimist, so I talk about the things that went well, but there was a lot of really good bills that were drawered, and that's very disappointing. Things like the Traditional Family Values Month that the vast majority of citizens support, and yet that's thwarted by usually one chairman in one committee that actually has more power than the governor himself, because he has the ability to do an effective veto without the possibility of an override. So that's a serious problem. I actually had a bill to address that, and that bill, you can probably guess what happened with that bill. It got introduced in the House, and then it got drawered before it ever got a hearing. And that was HCR 35, oh no, sorry, HCR 21. I call it the honor rule. The concept would be that to honor the work of the other chamber, you would have an automatic hearing within 10 days for any bill that passes with the 2/3 majority. And I think that that would make a huge difference. I say it's an honor rule because it's honoring the work of the other chamber, and it's also honoring the will of the people. 2/3 majority represents about 1.3 million people, and one chairman right now is able to stand in the way of that, of 1.3 million people in Idaho. So I think that's a travesty, and I will continue to bring that bill forward. I have a strategy. I think I can get it through the House, and we'll see what can happen in the Senate. Other bills that I worked on that on the brighter side would be the Online Child Safety Act. I worked with that with Representative Price on that. That requires age verification for minors on the internet to stop them from accessing pornographic material. And that passed and was signed into law. I think it's going to be a huge thing for the children of our state, and I'm really encouraged by that. And it put the parents in the driver's seat. It's not a government-driven bill. It puts the parents in the driver's seat, giving them the ability to sue content providers if they don't make reasonable efforts to have age verification for their children. So it's the parents that actually enforce that. I'm going to go over a minute, but I've already gone over a minute. Church security immunity. I carried a bill that ensures immunity for church security, because the unfortunate reality is that there's more and more attacks on our churches. So I think that was important. No public funds for gender transition was a huge bill, really important. Obviously, that's another thing that I think 10 years down the road, we're going to look back, and the fact that we're carving up our children and doing irreversible harm is going to not be viewed well in when history looks back at us. So I think we need to do everything we can to protect our children. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Elaine Price. I'm Representative District 4, Seat B, so these two are my seatmates. I guess I'm happy with the big wins that we got, but there are a lot of bills that I think would have benefited our community that didn't get passed. I agree. I think we need to do something about bills being drawered so that they can at least get a hearing. Even if the committee decides not to pass it to the floor, at least they got a hearing. And so I'd like to see our efforts on that happen. Ben took my thunder for House Bill 498. I think that the Online Child Protection Act was a huge win for the children of Idaho. And hopefully we'll see what happened in Utah where these websites just pulled out of the state. I would be happy if that's what they chose to do in Idaho as well. So I think that's a huge win. The budget process was a huge win. Although it was a disappointment that we didn't see any cuts this year, but they promise us that next year we will see some cuts. And what it allows, it allows our appropriations committees to deep dive into these budgets and find where the bloat is and cut that bloat out. So hopefully we'll be able to see that in the next session. And with that, I have an opponent. So in the primaries. So you've got to make sure you get out and vote, encourage your neighbors to get out and vote, and let this panel return to represent you next session.
I am Tony Wisniewski, District 5. This is the end of my third term, and I do intend to run for at least one more term. My major committee that I serve on is education, not by rational choice, but by necessity more than anything else. A couple of issues that happened in the Education Committee, depending on the day, I'm either the glass is half full or the glass is half empty, depending on which victory or defeat we've just experienced. The school choice tax credit unfortunately failed. The effort to rein in the power of the teachers' unions was a bill that would kind of cripple some of the benefits that the teachers' union has managed to get into their contracts. We tried to pull some of that back to a reasonable level, and that bill also failed. There was a other bill that actually failed that was good. It was outcome-based school education, and that would basically reward schools for basically doing their job, and it also had a measure of career and technical education. So the more career and technical education that a school was able to have their students participate in, they would get more money for that. Well, that's usually for post-secondary education, and that money really belongs in the K through 12 program and not in the post-secondary. So I'm glad that that bill failed. And then one of the biggest wins that hasn't been mentioned is the library bill. It finally passed. It took 3 years and 6 separate bills in order to get that passed. And when the governor finally did pass it, he wrote in his letter, he finally passed that stinking bill, and those are his words. And last year he vetoed it, and most of you remember that it came back for a possible veto override in the House. We needed 47 votes, we got 46. So there weren't enough honest Republicans to vote for that last year, and we finally got it through this year. One of the other things that we worked on was the serious issue of illegal immigration. And there was a bill that was initiated by Phil Hart, and I'll let him talk about that. And that's all I have to say for this summary.
Does this one work? Apparently it does. Hi, I'm Ron Mendive. Thank you all for coming. This is a very good turnout. I appreciate you all being here on a cloudy Saturday. But anyway, it's good to see you all. I'm just finishing my 12th year in the legislature, 6 terms. I am running again, and I lead for at least one more term, so we'll see how that turns out. As far as these legislative sessions go, I was told early on that each one takes on a life of its own, and I found that to be absolutely true. This one, I think, overall was a pretty good session. There's always losses. One thing that my seatmate, and I actually serve on the Education Committee with my seatmate, and then I chair the Resources and Conservation Committee, which actually is a pretty good fit for me with my background, and I actually do enjoy chairing that committee. I will tell you there's a lot of extra work involved in running a committee, and when you get there you learn that, but it's very rewarding as well. But anyway, one thing I have to mention is the library bill, even though Tony mentioned it. 3 years ago, when this first came up on our Education Committee, one of our members stood up on the Education Committee and said, if this committee can't pass a bill to protect children, I quit. And she left. And a bunch of us tried to get her back because she's a solid conservative voice on that committee, and she refused to come back. They kept her name out there and everything, but so that put us one short because we were short on conservatives on that committee anyway. But finally, after 3 years, we did get a pretty good bill, and that's the way the process works. It's give and take. Nobody gets what they want and everything, but still you work hard to get the best thing you can. And I think at the end of the day, we did get a pretty good library bill, and I'm grateful that we can protect children to some degree, even though it was a no-brainer, should have never needed it in the first place, but that's neither here nor there. Another thing we did, this legislature, in my 12 years there, I've been on the Education Committee that whole time. Charter schools. Charter schools has been an uphill climb. There have been resistance to charter schools. They've established themselves. They're doing a great job. The top schools in the state happen to be charter schools, and there are reasons for that. They are held accountable. It's interesting that to hold the traditional public schools accountable, it seems to be an impossible task. However, charter schools, if they don't achieve what they set out to do, they close them down. So that's something to think about, I guess. And another one, for 3 years, I've been working on a parents' driver's education bill to allow parents to teach their children how to drive. It actually has been an ongoing process. The last 2 years, Carl and I worked on it. We finally got it through this year, and the governor signed it last year. We got it through both houses, and the governor vetoed it. So anyway, we made some compromises there. This year, actually, the State Department of Education came on board and helped with the governor and helped in some of the things with that. And I think it's a good bill. One of the compromises was that for rural. So if you're a population of under 25,000, you can automatically teach your child to drive. However, if it's over 25,000, you can if the school district does not offer public driver's education. So I think that's a win for Idaho. And there again, that's part of the process. It took 3 years. Another thing I've been working on forever is parental choice in education. And that is a really hard lift. So we keep plugging away at that. And I guess at some point, you seem to wear things out and you might win. So anyway, all in all, I thought it was a good session. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Yes, hello, I'm Carl Bjerke, District 5 Senator. I have to say that I have a newfound respect for these legislators up here. I think it was early on in the first session, or the first half of the session, we had a town hall at Candlelight, and someone came up to me afterward and said, you seem pretty, sense of humor, you seem pretty lighthearted. And I have to tell you that my countenance has changed. I feel a bit more battle-hardened after completing my first term, and I feel it. It was an interesting session. I'll echo that. You could look at it very positively, and there's some other things that maybe felt kind of dark and tension-filled. I'm particularly happy. A lot of people have talked about the budget. We made some huge changes in how we have that process of doing the state budget. Not without the battle scars for that, and it's yet to be seen what the complete fallout will be for the folks that really worked hard to push that forward. On a personal note, I was happy to have, over this 2-year period, about 10 bills that I was able to get across. One, obviously, that Representative Mendive mentioned that we worked on together. Some of the ones that I was particularly happy to see get through, and I worked with Representative Julianne Young on, were health freedom type bills. We had a residential care facility visitation bill that we passed. We had another one for an essential caregiver, which is very similar. Kind of the answer to COVID when people were locked down and people couldn't visit their loved ones in the hospital. So that we addressed that in these 2 bills. Another one that I was really pleased that we were able to get across this time was a counselor conscience bill. And the simplest way to describe it is if you're a counselor or a psychologist and you're working with somebody and at some point they're maybe working on their OCD or some kind of substance abuse issue, and they decide, well, hey, you're working with me on these issues, could you help me transition as well? So as you, being a counselor or a psychologist, you now have the right to say, I don't want to, fulfill those outcomes and to help assist with that. So your conscience and your deeply seated religious beliefs, you have an out, so to speak. That was a big one. There's a lot of counselors who are putting themselves or getting put into a pressure situation where, due to third-party billers and Medicare, Medicaid, they were being told they had to do this regardless of what their thoughts were. That was a big one. Had a couple fiscal bills that I was really happy to get over the 2-year period. One being the work requirements for SNAP, and the other one to stop state and federal funding for needle exchange programs. So those are 2 things that I think are really important from a fiscal standpoint. What we can't do every time with the budget, there's other means to be fiscally responsible and to solve some of these problems moving forward. But all in all, I'm also being challenged this time, so I'm kind of in campaign mode. Not kind of, I am. And is sullen and a little bit more reserved than my humorous town hall a couple of years ago. I'm still willing to do this. I'm still willing to do this and work hard. It's a service that I'm willing to do as long as the people in District 5 see it appropriate to keep sending me back down to Boise. It's great to see everybody out today, and I thank you for the opportunity to kind of let you know what happened in this 67th legislative session. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Phil Hart. I am the senator from Legislative District 2. So Legislative District 2 includes 5 counties. There's 3 precincts in Bonner County at the southern edge of Bonner County. There's 8 precincts in Kootenai County from Spirit Lake over to Bayview, and then on the east side of Lake Coeur d'Alene. And then it's all of Shoshone County, Benoit County, and Clearwater County. And for me, this is convenient to be here because I work in Hayden, and I'm just going to go to my office and we're done. 2 years ago in the Senate, there were 3 conservatives. Steve Vick was one of them, Regina Bear, and Christy Zito. And the conservatives didn't have much influence in the Senate. Well, this time there's 11 conservatives, and 4 of them are on this panel here. And the conservatives did have influence in the legislature this past 2 years. We were able to kill some bills a couple of times. The conservatives tend to be libertarian, and Democrats tend to be libertarian in some sense. And so there were a few times when the conservatives and Democrats could team up and kill something. So we hadn't seen that in the Idaho Senate for a long time. And I'm optimistic about next year because I think we're going to pick up a couple more seats. Well, in the legislative process, there's about 700 to 900 bills introduced every session, and about a third of those get signed into law. So it's not unusual that you bring a bill back over and over again. So I have some bills I worked on this session I have to bring back. I had 3 bills I worked on that dealt with illegal immigration. One of those was a bill we took from Texas, which would have allowed for an interstate compact between states to deal with the invasion at the southern border. And in the U.S. Constitution, there's a requirement that Congress approve compacts between states, except there's an exception. There's an exception when there's an invasion or when there's an emergency. So we brought that bill under that exception. Texas got that done last year. Idaho would have been the second state to do it. It got out of the House. It failed in Senate State Affairs. And it was kind of interesting. The complaint they had in State Affairs was we were giving the governor too much authority. But we're dealing with an emergency, so how can you regulate the amount of authority you need for an emergency? And the more senior members of that committee were debating in favor of the bill, and it was the more junior members of that committee who voted against it. But anyways, I will bring that back next year. I suspect next year we'll get that done. Another bill that we ran to discourage illegal immigrants from coming to Idaho was House Bill 615, and I worked on that with Jordan Redman. And that was a bill that would have denied benefits to illegal aliens coming to Idaho. If you can believe it, that bill died in health and welfare, and there were 3 Republicans who teamed up with the Democrats to kill it. But we will bring that back again, and I'm already working with the Department of Health and Welfare on that, so we can come back with a better argument. And the third one was the one I worked the hardest on, but I didn't get a hearing on. It wasn't really ready till the end of the session. And that's a bill that copies what Oklahoma's doing, where it would tax wire transfers leaving the state of Idaho, going into foreign countries. You'd be exempt from the tax if you're here legally, and which is what Oklahoma does. Oklahoma keeps 95% of the money that they collect on that tax. 5% is refunded to people who paid the tax but are in Oklahoma legally. I think that's going to generate about $18 to $19 million, and the bill, which didn't get a hearing, would use most of that money to create a county guard at the county level, similar to a state guard that half the states have. You know, we have several kinds of sort of state state organizations with under the military branch of state government. We have the National Guard, which in my mind is totally federalized and is over the 4 corners of the earth half the time. Then half the states have a state guard, and my idea was to have a county guard at the county level underneath the authority of the sheriff. I worked on 11 bills that I tried to author. 3 of them dealt with illegal immigration. One of them was a bill that would have created a constitutional amendment that would prohibit ranked choice voting, and Vito and I worked on that together. We'll bring that back next year. It didn't get out of the House. It needs a 2/3 majority vote, and I think we were 5 votes short in the House. And then one of the biggest issues that doesn't get a lot of attention is the money issue. You know, if you're a high school kid right now, you can't get married and have a family and buy a house. It's beyond your reach. And that's because we have a money system that allows for the creation of money out of thin air. Right now we're adding $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days. This was totally predictable if you're an economist who understands how fiat money systems work. I had a bill that would have authorized the state treasurer to invest part of the Idaho Monies Fund in physical gold and silver to be stored somewhere in Idaho. And it took 4 years to get that bill to the governor's desk. He vetoed it. So we will bring it back again next year. I thought his excuse on the veto is pretty flimsy. He said that the physical no wasn't strong enough. But in the research I did, right now the state is investing in commercial paper or debt paper, let's just call it debt paper, treasury bills, mortgage-backed securities, revenue anticipation bonds, commercial paper. All that's paying an interest rate of 3 to 5%. We know inflation is way beyond that, so we're upside down on all of that. But when you buy and sell treasuries, there's a transaction cost. When you buy and sell physical gold, there's a transaction cost. The amount of the transaction cost is the same, whether it's physical gold or treasury bills. And the storage fees for physical gold are the same as the maintenance fees on on an account that holds debt paper. So the transaction costs and the storage fees were the same, whether you're into gold or whether you're into debt paper. And so the fiscal note was fine. I think he had other reasons for vetoing it, but that'll come back again next year because we've got to push back on our money system. It's a federal issue. There's things we can do at the state level, and it's really important that we do that. And I guess with that, we'll turn it back over to Bruce Mattare.
Thank you, Senator.